what a pleasure
All
and
right,
honor.
we're gonna go live over here, and then I'll go so we don't have to delay.
Congratulations on
Thanks.
all the wonderful work that you've done bringing to the organic sector. And I'm with you. I get a little angry and annoyed when I hear people say that we've lost our soul. We're an industry, we're still a movement. I think we're a lifestyle, but I think more than that, we do have such a heart and soul for compassion, so many of us, in what we're doing. And I see that in the youth too, as they embrace it. So I want to thank you so much for all the great work you've done.
Well, you're welcome. And I guess the also it's never finished. And relative to organic, many of us made the decision either directly or intuitively that so-called secondary issues, at least in the 90s, the honor and respect of labor, the role of water.
And then, once I go through like the basic intro, I'll have you introduce yourself. You can say whatever you want to say as far as your background and with bullying. So
The former bully.
you can brag on yourself all you want. That's what I tell everybody, brag on yourself.
Yes, I'm very proud of my days as a bully. Because I bullied well. I made sure that the people knew that they were bullied. I got the surveys and
Mm-hmm.
I got high marks in my bullying.
So Bob, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah.
If only it was that simple and
So many other things that you're involved
that acceptable.
Well, thank you, Teresa, and I miss you.
All right, we're about to go live. You are listening to WEFT Champaign 90.1 FM. Listen to Rootstock Radio every Monday at 5:30 p.m. on WEFT Community Radio. Coming up next is In the Know, a WEFT-produced public affairs show that highlights locally available resources. Stay with us after that for Champaign-Urbana Radio Theater at 7 p.m. Monday night R&R at 8. Live local music on WEFT Sessions at 10, and recorded local music on Champaign Local 901 at 11. Now we're going to do a little bit of underwriting, and then we will get right into In the Know. Okay, I'm going to turn your mic on. Good evening, CU community. You're listening to WEFT 90.1. Welcome to In the Know, a public affairs show where social issues, trending topics, relevant research, and important perspectives are discussed so you, the listener, can be in the know. The opinions expressed on this show are those of the guests, of the host and guests, and not of WEFT Champaign. We're streaming live on my personal Facebook page. Listeners are welcome to submit comments and questions on the Facebook live stream or via Twitter at Nature79. You can also call in this evening. We're going to try this out tonight. Phone numbers are 217-359-5483 and 359-6545. I know a lot of people out there have had some level of bullying. We're not just talking about what happens with kids. We know that this happens with adults in the workplace also, and in a lot of other different areas of life. So you're welcome to call in. Share the good, the bad, the ugly, the life-changing, the positive changes that have happened. But we would love to hear from you this evening. My guest in the studio tonight is Jonathan Westfield. I want to send out a congratulations to him on being elected to the Parkland Board of Trustees. So congratulations, Jonathan.
Well, thank you.
And then just tell me a little bit about your background, what you're doing now, and how you've done this type of work in the community.
Well, I started, much like anybody else, going through the bully experience growing up and learning that it's a lifelong process. It's not one that ends the moment you cross the stage in high school. It continues, going from the various roles that you can play, from being a victim, from being a witness, from even being a bully, the offender. So I've experienced it. And as a police officer, once I started working in the schools as a school resource officer, I made it a point to make sure that the issue was addressed, that people understood what bullying is, how it affects students, and how it affects the community.
Mm-hmm. So I think that's one of the things that is kind of, debatable in some ways is, what this idea of bullying actually is. There's a lot of different definitions. I think when we're looking at how schools interpret bullying, how they define it, how, even law enforcement defines it, because I think that's where, a parent can be passionate about what their child is experiencing and want to escalate it to the level of having law enforcement involved. So when we're talking about bullying, how do you define that?
How do I define it? How did I define it? When I was working at the police department, I ended up putting together information related to bullying and its effects. And I defined it as an intentional act by a more powerful person or perceived to be more powerful person intended to hurt or embarrass another, or a way in which someone gains attention at the expense of others. I figured if you kept it simple, people could understand it and readily identify it, and to show that it dealt with the issue of perception, because bullying has changed, that it's not the traditional bigger kid on the playground pushing around a smaller kid. You have people who are of same sizes or different sizes. You have those that can utilize academics as a way of bullying others.
Right, yeah.
And people don't really see that, and they wouldn't count that as bullying. But I want to make sure that the definition we worked with was one that encompassed as much of the bullying environment as possible.
Yeah, I mean, that I think is the one thing that I hear when I talk to parents is there is this discrepancy when it comes to, and even misconceptions when it comes to bullying, that, a kid looking at another kid, wrong across the lunchroom, or, just kind of maybe bumping up against somebody. I think, whenever a child feels unsafe, which we should take that seriously, but does it rise to the definition and to the level of bullying, at least to the types of interventions that would be applied?
It's about perception, and people tend to forget that communication isn't just verbal. It has so many different subtleties. I mean, body language, nonverbal cues, all go into communicating, and it works in that realm. Why can't it work in realms of other interactions like bullying?
Right. One of the definitions, because when I looked this up online, there's so much information on the internet about this kind of stuff.
Amazing.
It says, what is bullying? So intentional, like you said, the behavior was aggressive and a deliberate attempt to hurt another person. Repeated, these aggressive actions occur repeatedly over time to the same person or group of people. Power imbalance, the person bullying has more physical or social power than the child or children being bullied. And that was information, just so if people want to look this up, that was information that came from Educational Development Center. Again, just kind of giving you basic ideas of what bullying is. And then when it said what constitutes bullying, it went on to elaborate physical bullying, such as kicking or pushing, verbal bullying, such as name calling or yelling, relational bullying, such as excluding or rumor spreading. I think at some point we've probably experienced what we've now learned is like cliques. There are these groups that operate within the school. We'll have our close set of friends, but cliques, I think people, when they're using that word, they're looking more not at their own group, but outwardly at the other types of groups that are around. So, for instance, the movie Mean Girls, I think that was one of the movies that kind of put a different spin on bullying, but I think at the same time, it kind of showed you maybe the perception of what these students feel on the inside.
Well, it showed you the social class bullying that had existed, but I always pointed out to kids the best example of bullying that they could see and they could easily identify was Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. In the song, it tells you, they used to laugh and call them names. They never let poor Rudolph join in any reindeer games. I mean, that's probably the best example of social isolation you can see as an example of bullying, and people know. I mean, everyone, their heart goes out to Rudolph. They feel for him, and they're happy when he's able to overcome
Right.
those obstacles set before him.
So, that kind of goes to, again, that perception of bullying. I think some parents will write off, when their child is kind of identified as the aggressor, maybe the bully in the situation, that it's just kids being kids. This is the type of behavior we're going to see them in this stage of development. You see kids, asserting themselves, they're pushing boundaries. So when you hear somebody say that, how do you help them? How do you reframe it for them so they understand what regular children playing is and what bullying is?
When people start to marginalize bullying and tell them that, oh, well, it's not as bad as what you make it out to be, say, okay, that's your perception, all right? But, I could tell you that, oh, well, your home being broken into is not as bad as you make it out. You wouldn't understand that. You would feel that, I was wrong. Well,
right.
You have to take into account that this is their perception, all right? And they do have a view that should be valid because it's their view.
Mm-hmm.
It may not agree with yours, but it's valid because it's theirs.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to take that in consideration. And we have to be honest as parents that while we may believe our children are angels, we tend to forget that the devil was an angel too.
Mm-hmm.
And that just because we believe they're perfect doesn't mean that everybody else sees them as that. Be honest with yourself about your child. They do things at home that you are amazed by. Why wouldn't they do things outside of your sight? Sometimes we forget. We tend to remember that, that beautiful little one that we brought home from the hospital, as opposed to that 2-year-old nightmare that's running through the house at 3:00 in the morning who just won't stop crying.
Yeah, I think, one of the conversations, it was just kind of funny that, adult women were seeing how we can see examples of, what happened in Mean Girl in regular life at our age, and we're pushing 40. But, there's a scene in Mean Girls where the main character is talking to the head bully of the group, and this other girl's walking down the hallway, and she says, "Oh, I love that skirt. That's, the cutest skirt." She's like, "Oh," the girl's saying, "Oh, it's vintage." And then when the other girl walks away, the head bully says to the main character, "That's the ugliest effing skirt I've ever seen." And so it's this idea that I think people see bullying as, well, once a bully, always a bully, like the main character in the movie. But I think we also need to understand that there can be situational bullying where, you're not necessarily giving into peer pressure, but there's something about an interaction with one person that, trigger something in you, and so you react in a way that's probably not nice. But I think, again, you want to be able to help people understand that just because your child has done this once doesn't mean we're going to brand them forever this way. We understand that situations come up, but I think it still really is at the heart of all of it. It's that definition of bullying,
And people need to understand that when it comes to bullying, you can run through 3 different phases of it. You can be the victim.
Okay.
You can be the witness of it, or you can be the offender in it. And no one stays in one category their whole life. People do switch. I mean, there are times that people who have had years of being a bully experience it.
Mm-hmm.
The tables are turned. Are there witnesses? So people move in and out of them. And what people should take away is that you have to be aware of where you are. And life is a conscious effort. And you should always be aware. How are your actions going to affect others? I mean, if you don't like something, be honest. People can appreciate the honesty of the situation, of the statement, as opposed to, the shallow hidden response that you may give just to be polite.
Right, yeah.
If you don't like it, then you don't like it. That's fine. People
So,
understand that.
One thing I think that we see now that we weren't seeing 5 years ago, 10 years ago, is the introduction of technology into bullying. I think in some ways that's kind of up the ante because now children have more access to each other outside of school. Not to say that you could just always, like we say, leave work at work and they're leaving the bullying at, during school hours, but now it can actually cross over into non-school hours where they can find themselves, being the victim of text messages or social media or whatever it is.
Well, bullying is an issue that plagues society. It's not just limited to the schools. And with the onset of ready available communication through technology, you see that more. You become more aware of that. And the biggest issue I think that we face, in this, 30 years ago, it was a spiral notebook.
Right.
And, you never heard anyone call it spiral bullying.
Right. Right.
So cyberbullying and what you have today, it's still bullying. Excuse me. And we treat it as that. It's just a mediums change.
Mm-hmm.
If we didn't, we had bathroom stalls, we had phone books, we had walls. You could write it on desktops.
Right.
That was your social media, put it on a locker. Now it's more abstract. It's in the digital realm and people can post whatever. You can find people who have courage at home in front of a keyboard that they may not necessarily have in public in front of that person. Bullying isn't real to a lot of people because it doesn't affect them.
Right.
I think that's something we need to understand. And when you live in a society that worships violence and you get this kind of behavior, you shouldn't be surprised. The whole minimizing it and treating it as if, it's part of life. Yes, wow, man is an animal. I thought we had evolved past the level of developing a pecking order,
mm-hmm.
And seeing and determining who was better. I thought we live with the understanding that every life has a value.
Right.
And what that value is determined at the end.
Mm-hmm. I think though, one of the scary things that, especially for parents, we've seen instances where bullying has resulted in the death of children, either because a group of students have escalated it to the point where they've harmed a child and it's caused a death, or you have children who commit suicide because they're being bullied. It's, unfortunate that we have those types of situations that are happening to really bring us back full circle to creating awareness about bullying. But I think that's, a parent's worst nightmare, that it's happening to their child, and even worse, they're not aware of it, because it can be hard for the victim to, disclose this to anybody because of, concern about recourse. Is the bullying going to make it worse? Or, I've had some parents say that their student waited as long as they did to tell them about the situation because they had told the teacher before and the teacher didn't really do anything. And so they felt like, well, what is my parent going to be able to do? They're not in the school. And I've tried to have a teacher help me and they weren't able to help. So who else is going to be able to help? When you were doing the work that you were doing in the community with bullying, did you ever hear those kind of stories that, we tried to get the school involved and it just wasn't working?
Oh gosh, no, people never said anything like that. Yes, that was a common statement. And I always addressed it with parents that, well, how did you handle bullying when you were growing up? And there was a pause. You said that pretty much tells you your child is going to respond in the way that you taught them, in the way that you've experienced it. As a parent, I know as a child I didn't address it properly. And I know as a society, we haven't addressed bullying properly. It's generational. It's an inheritance that everyone gets. No one wants to deal with it.
Mm-hmm.
They always expect the youngest to clean it up. And if I can't solve it as an adult, how can I expect my 12-year-old to be able to handle it?
Mm-hmm.
And what needs to happen is that people need to realize you have to ask how the day is going, because we know when we were children, we didn't tell our parents everything. as if the rules change once we become parents, because now, somehow we've established that bond with our child that they will automatically tell us whatever we wanted to know when we just asked them. And, that's not the case.
Right, yeah.
Your child will tell you when you ask, how's everything going? Oh, it's fine. You got all your work done? Yeah. 5 late assignments and 3 calls from, their teacher later, you find out otherwise. So they are managing the problem just as well as we did.
Right, yeah.
And you have to work at getting them to do it. And you have to, a lot of times, set the example.
So I want to play a clip from a documentary. I actually screened this last year, or not last year, I guess it was a few years ago now. We had a panel at Centennial High School. Erica Harold was one of our guests. Dr. Dorothy Espalage was a guest. And we talked about bullying, but we screened this documentary called Bully. And if you haven't seen it, I recommend watching it. It's very, it's kind of a hard watch in some ways, because these kids are just giving you this very candid perspective of what's going on with them. But, kind of give you a couple seconds of what's going on with the main character, as he's talking about the different things going on with him. This is the main character's walking to his bus stop in the morning. The one thing you can't see on here is that the main character is standing with a couple other boys, and he's talking about he's this other boy's kind of a bully in a lot of ways. He's talking with this other kid. He's like, "Hey, you're my buddy, okay?" And the other kid is basically saying, he's like, "I'm not your buddy." He's like, "I'll end you." And this kid is just trying to make friends with somebody on the school and the bus on the way there. And he's, this other kid is swearing at him and telling him that, he has no intention of being his friend when this child is trying to reach out to him. Even, small things like that, I think we forget that these kids can go through. They're trying to reach out. They're trying to make friends. They're trying to do, like you said, they're trying to deal with bullying in their own way, making the best of it. And then we have these situations where, another child is not being as nice as they can. And, we go back to the concept of Mean Girls, where a girl might reach out to another clique of girls and try to make friends with them. And for whatever reason, these girls decide not to be nice to a girl. So, I think that's kind of, some of the harder things to deal with when it comes to, understanding bullying. Like we talked about, parents don't always want to believe that their child is the one who's participating in this. So I think one of the questions is, how do you teach your child to be a nice kid? I mean, that's such a cliche question in some ways.
Well, you should teach your child to be civil, be polite towards everyone. And understandably, you get to pick your own friends, but always be polite to people. There's no harm in saying hi to someone when they say hi to you. I mean, the greatest thing you could do for another person is to recognize their presence by saying hi. Right? That's it. Some people, that's enough for them to make it through the day. Be polite. You don't have to be nice. You should always be polite. Being nice is like being a friend. You get to choose how you want to, but you should always be polite. Be courteous. If you don't like someone, be polite and tell them, well, thank you, but no, I'm not interested in being friends.
Mm-hmm.
People can understand that, but the fact that, the kid said, well, I'll end you, that I have a problem with. You said, no, we're not friends. You could have left it at that.
Right.
And he can decide who his friends are. That's something that any person has the right to do. Yeah, I would never tell you you have to be friends with someone. You get to pick and choose who you like and who you want to associate with because that's your choice. All right. But you shouldn't be mean and you shouldn't be cruel to others in that. Be polite. Just tell them, be honest, but do it and be polite. We don't teach that. We don't encourage it, or do we, expect it? We watch shows that, people laugh at the mistreatment of others and find humor in it. I mean, slapstick comedy is one thing, but when it's cruel and mean-spirited, it's not funny. And a lot of this is the result of that. To add insult to injury. Telling somebody that you don't like them is going to hurt them, yes. But to add insult by saying that, I'll end you, it's like you have no value, that you don't even need to exist.
Right.
That goes beyond being cruel.
Right. I think, again, kind of going back to the, the continual question of, what bullying is, I think, our kids are going to experience conflict, and a lot of schools do their best to help students work through conflict. Helping them to work through, conflict within a classroom, on the schoolyard. I was at a PTA meeting where one of the PTA reps was saying, their school had made a point of addressing bullying, and that it happened a lot on the playground at recess time. And so that changed the way the teachers kind of walked around and supervised the students during that time, because they recognized that this was one of the kind of the key times when this would happen. But again, you can't have a teacher watching your child all the time. You have to be able to give them tools and resources to deal with conflict. But again, I think it's being able to draw that line and helping your student to understand when it's conflict and when it has actually rose to the level of bullying, because then you need to be able to help your child know when to identify, when they, reach out to a teacher, when they reach out to an adult who, should be supporting that safe space for them at the school. So that is one thing, to try to work with your student on. So, one of the things I've read online is that it can be just as damaging to call somebody a bully who isn't a bully. So being able to help your child understand conflict versus bullying is also really important too.
Well, people need to know what the victim of a bully is. The victim of a bullying is someone who does not instigate the incident, nor do they respond to the incident. That's the big thing. They take no action to cause it, and they take no action to resolve it. It just happens to them, and they move on.
So what's an example of that, so listeners can understand what we're saying here?
Well, the classic example would be you and I walking down the hall, and me coming up to you and knocking your books out of your hand and kicking them and walking away. That would be the classic example of bullying. All right. Now, where it becomes conflict is if I initiate an action and you immediately respond to that action. It would be I push you and you push me back. Well, that's a conflict because we're equal participants in it. Doesn't matter whether or not, it's not that someone started, it's that you responded to it. So that makes it a conflict, that takes it out of the realm because you don't have the perception of someone being more powerful. You have two people who are on equal footing and one is addressing the other. So that's where you have the difference. Bullying, there is that perceived point of power. Conflict, they're equal.
So even if, let's say, like you said, I'm in the hallway and somebody comes up to me and pushes me, if I don't respond, and this is something that continually happens on a regular basis, then that's bullying. However, if I do respond, and does it really matter the way I respond, whether it's verbal or physical, or are we just looking at
It all depends. I mean, you could call me a name and go on a string of expletives to describe my behavior. You could pick the books up and throw them at me.
Okay.
I mean, it's the response that there's an action and there's a correlating response.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to look at it like that. One thing I want to make sure people are clear on, when it comes to bullying, you can have 15 prior incidences of bullying.
Mm-hmm.
But if you've never reported those, and you reported on the 16th, it's the 6th, that is the first incident of reported bullying. People can note that this has been stated as an ongoing problem, but the first reported incident is that one that brings him there. Always make note of it. While it may not seem like it's gaining any ground in that first or second or third report, what you're showing is a pattern of behavior that can be documented, that can be better addressed. It's like a snowball. As you roll it down the hill, it gains momentum and it gains mass as it goes.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how you should look at it. That's what reporting is. It may start out very simple and it may not seem as if it is doing anything. But the more you report it, the more it goes on, the more momentum it gains,
Mm-hmm.
the more mass it gains, the more attention it gains, and the better people are able to address it. Well, one thing about bullying, you can't address it if you're unaware of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I always told parents that in a hallway at passing time in the middle school, there's about 200 students in the hallway and maybe 10 teachers. They can't see everything.
Mm-hmm.
They're generally looking in the hallway, but their attention will gravitate to those things that draw their attention. A loud
Mhm.
conversation, a student that they recognize that they need to talk to, those things. So a teacher could be standing 3 feet away from an incident of bullying and never notice it because there is so much going on.
Mm-hmm.
It's like pointing at a brick wall and asking someone to find that brick with the white spot on it.
Mm-hmm.
That looks like Abraham Lincoln.
Mm-hmm.
And you're like, well, there's a lot of white spots on the brick wall. And, not to say that the teachers are overlooking it, but they have a lot to look at. And don't assume that because they're there, they see it.
Mm-hmm.
As parents, we know we can be in the same room as our child and miss an entire argument and fight that happens and wondering, okay, who started? And well, you were sitting right there. It's like, I must have missed it.
Right. Yeah, I think that can be the one thing that, because teachers and, other school staff are typically present in the school, they can be in the hallways. I remember the first couple of years I was at my high school, the principal was in the hallway all the time. He knew a lot of the kids by name and was, he was there. But that's not to say that, 10 feet away from him, somebody couldn't be bullied. It's not something as obvious as being thrown up against a locker. Bullying has become much more subtle. I think we've now seen that with the introduction of cyberbullying. That's not subtle, but again, it's not obvious, I think, sometimes where parents may feel like, well, you should have seen it.
Well, the distinction in how it's done just between males and females. Boys have a different style of bullying than girls.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a time where I said, no, bullying is bullying, girls bully just like boys, until it was pointed out to me that, no, it's not. I was given an example, and I knew exactly the example that the presenter was talking about because I had been in the cafeteria the same year. She had pointed out that a girl walks into a cafeteria, walks by a table, and throws her trays down and starts yelling at a table full of girls.
Mm-hmm.
The staff members that are in the cafeteria come over there and address the girl as being the problem. But she's explaining that they're picking on her.
Mm-hmm.
And the girls are all saying no. We were just sitting here, we were laughing. We weren't bothering her. And so they would look at me and they were laughing. And, you know, guilty as charged. I would have been that one that would have dealt with the girl that threw the tray down.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I had to learn that, you know, when it comes to girls, there's a lot more subtlety than it. The boys may have to direct over your head, you know, with a brick kind of bullying. I'm going to bully you for this. Once it's done, I'm going to go play basketball.
Right.
Are you going to play too?
Right.
All right. The girls are, well, I'm just going to look at you. And then I'm going to look at my friends. And then we're going to look at you. And then we're going to look at another girl across the cabin. Like, I couldn't, it was hard for me to process because, well, I didn't think that way. And I had never thought, like, so a look could be that. And said that look can be so much. And when she pointed out, she asked some of the women that were in the audience, said, are there people that you still hate from third grade? And you saw all these hands shot up and said, why do you hate them? I don't know why, but, you know, I still don't like them to this day. I'm like, really? There's more to it than just the physical act.
Right.
The look, the conversations that go on, because the girl at the table who started it may not like her. Or she tells her friend who's at another school, who's in another class, and it just spiderwebs out.
Right.
And others join in.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, they did look at her and they did laugh at her, just like the girl said, and they knew it. But to the unaware or the uninformed, you would miss it.
Right. Yeah. Another distinction that I found online, it said, what's the difference between bullying and harassment? It said bullying and harassment are often used interchangeably when talking about hurtful or harmful behavior. They're very similar, but in terms of definition, there's an important difference. Bullying and harassment are similar as they are both about power and control, actions that hurt or harm another person physically or emotionally, an imbalance of power between the target and the individual demonstrating the negative behavior, and the target having difficulty stopping the action directed at them. The distinction, though, between bullying and harassment is that when the bullying behavior directed at the target is also based on a protected class, that behavior is then defined as harassment. Protected classes include race, color, religion, sex, age, disability, and national origin. I think we've also seen now that, again, as society has evolved and we're starting to talk about more things, you now see it with a new group that I think has always existed, but now we're creating better awareness, but the LGBT community. I want to play a clip from, again, the documentary Bullying, about an individual who is part of that community and how it impacted them. So, that shows you even the effects that it can have on parents. This is something that's not just isolated to the victim. A lot of times this is something that we see turning communities upside down, and not just saying, towns, we're talking about like school communities and neighborhood communities where somebody is identified as a little bit different, and now all of a sudden, we're seeing, different behavior that, like he was saying, these are people we used to spend time with all the time, and now they've turned their backs on us. Just to kind of give statistics about bullying, how common it is. 28% of students 6th to 12th grade have identified as victims of bullying. 30% of high school students. Teachers tend to underestimate how much bullying goes on, and parents typically are only aware of their child being bullied half of the time. So those are kind of some staggering numbers, and those are just the ones who reported that they have experienced bullying. And again, I want to kind of point this out. This is, whether the student has the ability to make the distinction of what bullying is. Again, we've said that it is subjective in a lot of ways when it first starts out. So, that these numbers could be a lot higher if we were able to give students the knowledge to understand what bullying is. I'd be interested to know what the numbers would be if we were to poll students and say, how often though have you witnessed bullying? Even if you haven't been the victim, how often have you witnessed it? And see how honest they would be if you ask, how often have you been a part of it? Because again, you may say that I wasn't the one who was directly saying anything, but I was standing there. I was kind of that presence in numbers. I was, in some ways co-opting what the bully was doing to the other person because I wasn't intervening. I was kind of laughing along. So again, here's these definitions. Here's we're trying to explain to our children, just because you aren't the one who necessarily instigates it, if you're the one who supports it or you help perpetuate it, you could be viewed in that way. Again, with technology coming into play, and like you said, just kind of the way media portrays bullying, a lot of people think, oh, it's just funny. It's just kind of a jest. But I think we're seeing that, that this happens in a lot more instances than what we're aware of.
If you really want the honest numbers, talk to 3rd and 4th graders. They'll give you honest answers because by the time they get to middle school, they learn the social coping skills of how to get. And when I would do bullying presentations at that age, with 3rd and 4th graders, I would do a survey. And I got higher numbers on bullying because they were honest about it. Mm-hmm. A 6th grader tells you that they're bullying, and they know that they're going to be questions and they may not be comfortable with asking. The 3rd or 4th grader is telling you what they've experienced, and they're going to be a lot more honest. They're not going to recoil from responding. Mm-hmm. I mean, you'll even get them to admit that they were bullying. That surprised me. I mean, I did a presentation to a 4th grade class years ago, and one girl she said she hadn't participated in any types of bullying behavior. And I'm like, okay, this isn't. Then a kid stood up and said, she doesn't. I bullied her and she doesn't. Mm-hmm. She doesn't do anything. The class came to her defense. And that amazed me. This is a 4th grade class and they're being honest. I mean, kid just stood up and said that. I bullied her and she doesn't do anything. And I thought, wow. That was just an amazing exchange that I had with the class. I mean, it gave me a better perspective of it, that they were aware, and the other kids said, yeah. And we tried to get it to stop, and we told, but he says, no, I bullied.
Right.
And it's not that he was apologetic. He was just being honest about his behavior.
Well, I think it's wonderful when you have those kind of breakthrough moments where students are able to see that type of exchange where a student says, I recognize that I bullied. I think, we get to the point where, okay, so now we're kind of breaking through, the initial barrier of talking about bullying, and we're defining it. And now we're helping teachers and parents and even students to understand when they're seeing it, so they, have a better idea of what it is they're looking at. But then comes the question, which, there's always $1 million question when it comes to different topics, but, why does it occur? There were a lot of different reasons that were online for why kids bully. Peer pressure, again, friends might be the bully. Social pressure, wanting to be popular. The child has low self-esteem. Parents might not be involved much in their lives. There could be a mental health issue going on. Or they don't perceive violence as a negative thing, which that was the one when I was talking to a friend about, the show tonight, when I was saying, this is one of the things that came up consistently was that, some students might not perceive violence as a bad thing. And they kind of, sat there for a second and thought, well, how could that be possible that you can't see violence as a bad thing? But if this is something like you were talking about, where we have it being generational and this is cyclical, if there's domestic violence in the house, or violence is what they see in, their neighborhood or their community or the social circles that they run in as a way to solve conflict, that's what they're taught. That's the only thing that they know.
Well, I mean, do they have a television? Do they
Right.
go to the movies? Do they play video games?
Yeah.
Do they read comic books? I mean, these are all mediums that celebrate violence.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't get away from it because people want to. And the main reason why bullying occurs is because we forget our connections to those around us. And the best way I was able to illustrate that to kids is I would ask in 8th grade class, how many grew up in Champaign? And the majority would stand. I said, okay, stand by. How many went to Bottenfield? How many went to Cary Busey? How many went to Kenwood? Or the name of schools. And I had them section off according to that. All right. So how many in this class that went to Bottenfield together have been in class with each other? So I'm going to tell them, since kindergarten, since 3rd grade, since 2nd grade, or, well, I transferred in, but he went to Bottenfield, they would immediately explain. Mm-hmm. And I said, okay, so you all have known each other pretty much most of your life. Do you speak to each other? I'm not saying have a full-blown conversation. Do you say hi and use that person's name because you know it? If I came in here with $1,000 and I said, who knows such and such, you could all go there and point out. You could take me right to them, right? But just for the simple well-being of another person, you can't say their name. You don't have to be best buds like you were in 2nd grade, mm-hmm. but you have to understand that you are connected. You all came from Bottenfield, you were in 2nd grade, you were in Miss such and such's class together, or Mr. Such-and-such's class. You know each other. Appreciate that. Because there'll be a point when you get older where you'll look back for that. And you'll look even to the worst of the ones in your class and say, hey, do you remember when it might not have been a great time, but somebody who knew you at a point other than where you're at now? Mm-hmm. And it's that connection. When you're not connected to someone, you really don't have a care or concern on what happens to them. Mm-hmm. And when something does, you don't feel it. And that's what we lost. We're not connected to each other. Mm-hmm. I mean, if you grew up here in Champaign, you know that you went to a certain school, you knew certain people there, you followed each other through elementary, through middle school, and through high school. You would pass each other in the hallway the first year in middle school, and you'd speak. By the end of that year, you wouldn't speak as much. Mm-hmm. 7th grade, you wouldn't speak often. 8th grade, you'd look. By the time in high school, parties became invisible to each other. Mm-hmm. But you knew.
I think you can see that, when you have high school reunions. You're reconnecting with people that maybe you haven't talked to in 20 years. And I think, technology and social media kind of takes away from that organic connection. I'm not saying you have to get coffee with somebody every time you try to interact with them, but I think when it's just limited to text message and it's just limited to social media, you don't have that chance to really reconnect with people. Last year and this year, I reconnected with people from high school. We would go, walking at Kaufman Lake, and again, it was just physically being able to talk to somebody and connect with them again. I think we miss that when we're just doing text messaging and just doing social media. But our kids are being raised on this idea that that's the easiest way to connect, or that's the popular way to connect. So, like you were saying, they forget to have that organic connection other than school, and then school's just so busy that connection kind
They
of
learn
gets
it
pushed
from
away.
us.
Yeah.
Because any parent knows they've heard this question. How do you know that person? They just said hi to you. How do you know them?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, well, I've seen them here, and we blow it off. And what we're teaching them indirectly is that somebody said hi, you blow it off, as opposed to we went to high school together, or we went to grade school together. Oh, so yes, we went, and being able to show them that connection, that there is more to people than just what you see. That we have a connection and we have a bond. It might not be the lifelong, hey, we're calling each other every day and having a conversation about, that blade of grass that is bothering me. But we have a bond that, hey, we're Tigers. We went to a better high school. We graduated together, class of 84. That's who we are.
Right.
That's our bond. All right? Celebrate that. All right? It gives you a connection to people. And it makes your understanding of what someone goes through a little easier to understand, because you know that person. Saying, well, that's not right. It would be interesting if we could walk around with a Facebook badge of hearts, laughs, wows, tears, and anger, and see how many would start popping up as we walk by people.
That would be an interesting experiment.
Well,
definitely.
After a while, you'd see very few people outside. And pretty much people would be isolated in their homes because they were fearful of, I'm not getting no likes. If you say hi to someone and you know their name, use their name, well, that's a like. Chalk it up to that. And go on.
I saw one article online. It was somebody who shared on their blog that in their community, which was probably roughly about our size, one of the parents felt like when she and her husband were in the school, they just saw all these instances of what it just blew their mind the way the kids were talking to each other, because and one of my girlfriends and I joked about this not long ago, that if we talked that way to our friends, our parents would have had our tails pretty quickly for that kind of behavior. But kids are saying all sorts of different things to each other, and so the parents took it upon themselves to start scheduling regular play dates and kind of do this child care sharing thing where if you want to go out on a date night with your husband, your kids can come over to the house. But they were extending it beyond their social circles. They were extending this to the school because they wanted to be able to foster relationships among children that would normally talk to each other at school. But the father ended up, because it was a blog shared by the mother and the father, but the father commented that, even for him, he was pushing himself out of his comfort circle. He was engaging with parents he may not have normally engaged with. Not to say he would have bullied them or anything, but again, like you're talking about this connection that we tend to lose and how our children emulate us, I think that it was a good example of how, as parents, we are the example, the way we treat other people, the way we talk about other people behind closed doors. That sets the bar for our children with how they respond to their peers. There's always going to be a level of pushing the envelope or not necessarily liking their student and maybe being a little bit too honest about that. But again, this is how they learn tact. This is how they learn grace. This is how they learn to be merciful. This is how they learn all of these different things by watching us. And so I love that idea that this father was able to recognize even with himself that he had pushed himself out of his comfort zone to engage with parents he hadn't normally engaged with. He said he, ended up creating this basketball group that played every Sunday. Their kids would come and play in the same park while they played basketball. And he said, it was just amazing how similar these other men's stories were to his. Not, obviously exact, but a lot of the same stuff that they grew up with and a lot of the same concerns they had as parents. And so, he said at the end of that school year, he felt like he had found allies and other parents, and that he even recognized how he'd been doing a disservice to himself and that he were just his children, because like you said, he had isolated behind social media and technology and hadn't pushed himself to engage. And I just thought that was a great story because, like you said, his parents were the example.
And well, I found athletics. It took remembering what it was like playing shooting stars, basketball as a kid here in Champaign, Urbana, playing Little League, and realizing that I knew somebody at every school,
Mm-hmm.
and that I had a connection to someone in every building that I went to because, I played baseball. And when you play baseball back then, you played against nearly everybody that somebody from every elementary school in Urbana, and you played against those in Champaign.
Mm-hmm.
So you saw each other and you knew. I mean, it wasn't a question of the skill level, but as you got older, it was like, who'd you play for? Well, I played for this. We played at this league, and it's like we all played Little League. And did you ever play against? And sitting and sharing those stories and having that bond, knowing that no, we didn't play on the same team, but we played Little League here, and they played on the team, and we beat them, they beat us, and being able to get that connection. That's what we're lacking in developing in our children, that connection, to show them that. Honestly, the Lion King would be, the circle of life, the connection that everyone is connected to each other.
Mm-hmm.
If we need to reestablish that, showing that, we all have a stake in the well-being of what goes on, because we all know each other through a connection.
Mm-hmm.
That you can put a group of people together and you could find two people and form a connection with them, but then it would grow like a daisy chain.
Mm-hmm.
And they would start to connect to other people in the crowd till you could actually get it to circle around.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what, if you really want to address the issue of bullying, you start with letting and showing children how to develop connections, having adults develop those connections. Go to your high school reunion. Don't blow it off. I think, you'd be surprised after 25, 30 years how people have changed.
Mm-hmm.
That some people go through humbling acts. Nothing like seeing two people who were diametrically opposed to each other in high school sitting down talking about how divorce affected them and what they're doing as single parents.
Mm-hmm.
And, wondering, you're seeing people saying, well, you're in this field, I'm doing this field, but I would never pictured you in this field. Yeah, I wouldn't either. But, and sharing life experiences and showing the connection that they have.
Yeah, I saw that. I went to my 20 year this year, and which kind of my age, but went to mine this year, and some people were slightly, some people went, some people didn't. There was a lot of people sharing, even remembering people who bullied them in high school, but it definitely was a fun time, and I think that's, like you said, a chance to reconnect, remember who you were, remember who the people were who were close friends with you, and it was a good time. Shout out to class of '97 at Centennial, but I think that's a good point with being able to reconnect with everything. But this is just the beginning of this conversation on bullying. We're going to unpack this a little bit more the next time we have a discussion about it. Thank you, Jonathan, for being on the show. We'll, get more into the effects of, bullying and, give even more information as far as what we can do to help parents, teachers, get a better conversation and dialogue going on with their students. Thank you, listeners, of course, for listening to In the Know again this week on Web 90.1 Champaign. Tonight's show will be archived on radiofreeamerica.com, my first personal Facebook page, and on Tumblr at In the Know 217. Next week, speaking of teachers, we're going to have some teachers from the Social Justice Education Group. It's a group of teachers who really try to work on a lot of topics that fall under the umbrella of social justice had a chance to attend one of their meetings, and I think these teachers are doing some really great work. So we'll be having that discussion next week. And I think next week we may also try again to do the call-in thing, see how that works. But thank you again, listeners, for tuning in. Thank you, Jonathan, for being part of the show.
Cool. Nice job. Oh, perfect timing. Juliet's here too.
It's so wonderful.
All right. So our next air shifter is on our way in.
Well, thank you for having me.